Yeah, it's interesting that when I first I first took up magic in the mid to late 30s, and that's a long time ago. Somebody asked me the other day, how long have you been doing magic? And I said, 70 years. That's quite a while. But when I first took it up, where could magicians work? Well, they could work in vaudeville. They weren't yet working in theaters. Most theaters in most towns across the United States were movie theaters with movie screens. And there just weren't a whole bunch of places for magicians to work.
Not many venues.
And so World War II began to change that. For example, I worked in some USO locations in World War II as the kid magician, you know. More places began to open up, and then they started finally working stages with movie screens. They'd have a show that started at 10 o'clock, and it would be a movie, you know, Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman or something like that, a black and white movie. And then when that was over, a dance band would be on stage. They raise the screen, and there'd be a 15, 16, 17 piece dance band. Might be Tommy Dorsey, you know, Artie Shaw, Glenn Miller. And one of the things that would happen while the dance band was playing is a guy like Tommy Martin, who later was a very good friend of mine, would come out and take a fan and crumple a piece of paper on the fan and juggle it on the fan like that, and suddenly it would have become an egg. And he'd take the egg and break it into a glass, thereby proving it was real, not something else, you know. Great act. And so you began to have short 8, 9 minute little acts put on by jugglers, dancers, magicians, you know, other than bands. And that would be part of the attraction, the stage show for that particular. And when that ended, the movie would come back on, and now it's 11:15, and the movie comes back on and plays again. At the end of that, the band comes back out, and during its performance, the magician performs, and then the movie plays again, and so on ad infinitum. And they do sometimes as many as 8 or 9 shows a day, like that. And so now there are more places for magicians to work. And as time went by, all of that kind of disappeared when the war ended. It was sort of like, oh, we've seen that. We don't want to see it anymore, kind of an attitude by the public. And all of a sudden, as we get into the late 40s, there was almost no place for a magician to get a job. But by that time, they had nightclubs. And a nightclub would be a place where you could go take your girlfriend or your wife and go have dinner. And they'd have a dance band, and you could dance on the dance floor. And then a guy would come out and say, ladies and gentlemen, our show for this evening features, you know, and they'd have a magician or a juggler or a singer or some other kind of an act would be on for sometimes as long as an hour. That opened up another thing that was called the nightclub act. And then there suddenly turned out to be another kind of a show, which Jay Marshall used to work all the time right here, called the club date. And the club date was a thing where on one evening, or occasionally 2 evenings back to back, never more than that, this Masonic temple here, for example, would put on its annual spring show, or its Easter show, whatever you want to call it, or Christmas show, or whatever the event was, and they'd have 5 or 6 acts. You could see a lot of magic around in those days from guys coming to work club dates. And as television began to take over, a lot of these other venues began to sort of shrink and disappear. You know, people would rather sit home and tune in Channel 6 than they would to get in their car and drive 3 miles or 8 miles or whatever, get a parking place, pay the parking thing, you know, and so on. I mean, so television, it's often been said that television probably destroyed a good part of show business. Magic is, quote, a novelty act. You know, magicians weren't big headliners. Magicians were novelty acts like dancers and jugglers. And the places they could work were determined by what's available out there in the boonies, you know. And by the time you got down to the late 50s, there weren't many places you could work. Most people couldn't even get arrested. So it was really difficult to get to do magic. And one reason why I finally came to the conclusion that I wanted to pursue a business career doing magic on the side, so to speak, one of the reasons I came to that conclusion was one day I woke up and I thought, you know, if I'd been making my living doing magic for the past 2 years, I wouldn't have had the price of a dinner. The stage that we used to see them all here was the English Hotel, and it became J.C. Penney's, and then became a completely different thing than that, so that's gone. And the Lyric Theater used to have a lot of shows, it's gone. So the great venues are gone, and the shows that they would put on there don't exist anymore because economically they just cost too much to even contemplate.
Yep.
The close-up field has burgeoned. I mean, there you couldn't even find the word close-up in a magic magazine or a catalog or anything in 1938. They didn't have the term yet. And look what's happened to that. I mean, you've got people everywhere doing close-up magic, and the restaurants, you know, and all the places that close-up workers work. So I think magic is going off in specialty directions, and there'll be places for magicians to work, you know, more than there were like in the early 50s where it was almost zero.